everyone wants to create space for Indigenous, and we've become such a fad within the last 5 or 10 years that people are finally now paying attention to us, because we do have people that are excelling in academia, that are excelling in engineering and in chemistry and everything, that people want to create a space for us.
Hello to our listeners, and a particular warm welcome to all educators, parents, and students across Canada from myself, Holly Bennett, English editor for the critically acclaimed Education Canada magazine. We are the only national bilingual magazine focusing on research, good practices, and voices of experience from across the entire spectrum of Canadian public education.
Yes, there's other issues such as domestic violence, sexual abuse, drug addictions, and suicide. But if we teach the younger generation this is not the way, this doesn't have to be like this, that things can be better, things will get better, and the younger generation will actually strive to actually make things better once they graduate, once they actually go out in the world and take on courses and take on problems that the world throws at us and solve them.
In this first edition of the Education Canada live podcast series, we speak with 4 Indigenous youth from across Canada on what truth and reconciliation means to them and how that should be reflected in schools.
You can't force somebody to learn something they don't want to learn, but I mean, in elementary, we all learned about the Holocaust and different wars that happened all over the world, obviously, so history doesn't repeat itself. I think if we can teach things like that, we should definitely be able to teach about the true history of Canada.
In our latest magazine issue, entitled Truth and Reconciliation in the Schools, we had the wonderful privilege of collaborating with Associate Professor Dr. Michelle Hogue of the University of Lethbridge in Alberta. Dr. Hogue is the coordinator of the university's First Nations Transition Program and our guest editor for this magazine issue.
Too many times I feel that people focus on each other's weaknesses and what makes this person weak, when we should really be focused on what makes this person strong and using those strengths to better our nation as a whole, rather than putting each other down.
I'd like to introduce my guests who are joining us today via telephone. Gregory Francis is from Kings Clear First Nation in New Brunswick. Tarese Thomas is from Enoch Cree Nation in Alberta and the northwest coast of BC. Hunter Martin is from Black Lake First Nation in Saskatchewan. And Talia Natowcappe is from Lestock, Saskatchewan, and is registered to Fishing Lake First Nations Band. My first question is, as youth and young adults of today, what do you think needs to happen as we move forward in this TRC era? Where do you think things should go? I know these are big, open-ended, tough questions, but really your generation are going to be the game changers, the one who will open up doors in a lot of different ways. So we're very interested in what you have to say.
For me, personally, is it's more or less because I go to the school in the city and not on reserve. Because when I was coming out of grade 9, the school I went to that's only 15 minutes away from Black Lake, called Stony Rapids.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I transferred down south, and it was for the betterment of my education, and I do like it here a lot. And so right now, since I am in what I would say in a good environment, like surroundings, and I have a good education, my marks are actually pretty nice at the moment.
Nice.
I think for me is only the stresses that I have at this moment is the stresses that I get from my family, knowing that they go through problems, they have alcohol abuse, and that suicide is happening. It really hinders me from actually concentrating on what needs to be done and taking from that these problems are there.
That's the same thing with me. I grew up on reserve, but I went to school. I did graduate from the high school in my reserve in Enoch Cree Nation, but basically from grade 1 to about 9, 10, I went to school in the city, and it was after that I went back to school in reserve. But it was for the same reason, because I wanted to get it wasn't even my parents. My parents weren't really around, but I wanted to get a better education for myself, so I registered myself and my siblings in the city school system. But I think that's a huge problem, the fact that we have to kind of outsource ourselves to other places other than our community where we can be involved with culture and with kinship. But those ties are sort of lost, and we have to make that leap just to have the same level of education that non-Indigenous people are having outside of these communities. And I think that's something that really needs to be addressed. Another thing in terms of kind of just indigenizing education, I think that it's really good. A lot of people are starting to learn about Indigenous histories in post-secondary, but I think one of the areas we really need to be focusing on is elementary, and it's from that K to 12. Because a lot of the gaps between Indigenous and non-Indigenous peoples and their thinking about and like stereotypes towards Indigenous peoples comes from the ignorance and not knowing the history and not understanding colonialism and the effect that it has on Indigenous people and why Indigenous people are there's such high rates of suicide and alcoholism, and there's a lot of our people in the prisons, and there's not a lot of understanding around that.
And I think that trying to promote that dialogue and having those conversations between Indigenous and non-Indigenous people will be able to understand each other's differences and be able to kind of find a common place where we'll be able to agree on something that will be able to allow us to move forward, because too many times I feel that people focus on each other's weaknesses and what makes this person weak, when we should really be focused on what makes this person strong and using those strengths to better our nation as a whole, rather than putting each other down.
I think that there needs to be spaces made for those types of conversations to have. I think it would be a good idea for people who are comfortable and trained in facilitating these types of conversations. They should be happening in school systems on different levels and different age groups, in whichever schools are willing to participate in trying to work towards reconciliation. But yeah, I think those conversations are important, and I think a lot of the time when people have those sort of conversations in a I don't really want to say safe space, because nobody can ever guarantee a safe space, but in a relatively safe space, I think that a lot of times people come to a lot better of an understanding, as opposed to kind of like learning something out of a book or learning about colonial history and just from hearing somebody talk about it. But I think conversations and having like roundtable events are really beneficial in terms of getting people to kind of shift their thinking process towards Indigenous peoples.
Well, I think what first needs to be instilled is that sense of cultural pride. Getting those little kids into a sweat lodge, getting them to participate in a sweat lodge, then they'll be able to carry the fire, and then they'll be able to be more prepared into the life that we send them off into. Because, I look at my friends that come from, I guess, a privileged lifestyle where their parents, were successful, had jobs, they had health care or health insurance, so you don't have to go to Indian affairs because it sucks, and there's such a huge stigma around it that when people bring it up, I'm actually kind of still ashamed that I need help from Indian affairs. And I don't even like using, I hate telling people that because it's a derogatory word, but as a comedian or as someone who enjoys laughter and use that as a tool to get through my entire life, because if you can't laugh about it, then it'll fucking kill you. Yeah, it'd be nice to teach it here in the university level and have more access to the cultural sense, but I think before we start even sharing it with our European ancestors or other minorities who are really beautiful too, we have to instill it in the kids and let us take it back before we can try to explain to anyone else how beautiful it is.
So far, from what I've got from the conversation, we've talked a lot about the barriers. And I think that one of the reasons why there's so many barriers in place or in front of our people is because that's kind of the narrative that we've been told. That's what we learn in the school systems. That's what society teaches us. Our families are all broken, so they can't teach us anything about who we are. So I think it's important for our generation and for us when we raise our children to kind of instill that in our own kids, that to be proud of who we are, and I think after that we need to start kind of peeling back these layers, that colonial narrative that's all over Canada that kind of fits an Indigenous person into one box, like a dumb drunk Indian. I think that in order to do that, we need to start within the school systems. I mean, I'm not talking about teaching culture or even teaching our languages to non-Indigenous people. I'm talking about teaching colonial history and the direct impacts that it had to Indigenous peoples and how and why.
I think that's one of our biggest issues right now that we're facing as a generation is we're really fighting for who we are. Like, I'm fighting to take back my language. I'm fighting to feel comfortable in my skin for being brown. And like the worst compliment, or not the worst compliment, the worst thing I remember someone said to me, because I identify as a person of color, I remember one of my so-called friends was like, but you're not that brown, or you're not that dark. And I'm like, oh. And she was a minority as well, but she could, like, I guess, pass as white. And I guess in her mind, well, I guess the darker you are, the worse it is. And I was like, that's just another problem. And yeah, I gotta fight to, learn my name in my language and figure out what Bear Clan actually means and what Eagle Woman means or Megazikwe, and finding out where my people come from and learning our traditions and why I carry a peace pipe. Like, I used to feel really awkward praying, and now it's just second nature. And, I've always felt something there, but like not knowing what Indian or being Aboriginal actually meant, I was so confused. I feel like I should be like my other non-Indigenous friends who are younger than me and getting their masters and PhDs. And I was like, not if I was smart, or if I had that, if I didn't have to overcome all the shitty things I went through as a kid and in my teens and what I've done to myself, because I was really incredibly hurt. Yeah, I didn't have to go to residential school to have the exact same effects happen to me, being in foster care, getting taken away from my parents, the molestation, the physical, mental abuse. It was all there.
And I wanted to add on my part, for my kids, or any other kid, I want them to go to school that feeling like they are not less human just because of who they are, their background, or their people.
Yeah.
I want them to feel fully human. That's just another part. Like, I went to school feeling left out just because of the color of my skin and who I am, separated from groups who are usually all Caucasian, but who've never had that connection with an Aboriginal person. But through it all, I found resolve in the sense that I found that there's friends out there who truly care about me just for who I am. And through that, I found strength also. And knowing that just because who I am doesn't mean I'm any less human than them.
It's just like everybody pretty much covered it. I just want, my grandchildren to, have that identity and not be at a disadvantage just because of their ethnicity or because of who they are, because that's something that a lot of Indigenous people are facing today, and what I think that all of us are saying or have been saying, just kind of through other means, that we have had more struggles, I would say, compared to other people, and I think that's what a lot of people don't realize.
I just hope that in 10 years from now, there's actually a school on every fucking reserve.
Properly funded school, maybe?
A properly funded, that has running water, that isn't in trailers, that, can give them a place to actually flourish and to realize who they are and be proud of who they are, but to also give them those life tools to make them successful. And I just don't want for them what I had, to worry about bills and worry about school in high school. I just want them to have a safe home, and that truly depends on me and us as parents, is not to make the same mistakes.
Thank you guys so much for joining us. I don't think anyone could hear you guys talk without having a lot of hope for the future and a lot of respect for all that what you've been through and what you're doing. To our listeners, thank you for joining us for this first edition of our Education Canada live podcast series. To join the conversation, follow us on Twitter at EdCanNet and check our magazine issue Truth and Reconciliation in the Schools at www.edcan.ca. Thanks for joining and take care.